Picture this, I'm standing in my driveway at 6 a.m., watching a tow truck haul away my brand new Honda Civic while my neighbor Karen smugly films the whole thing from her window. But what she didn't know was that I had already set in motion the most brilliant plan that would turn her precious HOA rules into her worst nightmare. By the time I was done, she would be begging me to park wherever I wanted. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how this war began, and trust me, you won't believe what happens next. It all started 6 months ago when I moved into Sunny Meadows, a quiet suburban neighborhood in Ohio. I was fresh out of college, working my first real job at a marketing firm, and finally had enough money saved up to buy a small house. Nothing fancy, just a cozy 2-bedroom place with a tiny front yard and a single-car garage that I converted into my home office. The house was perfect for me, except for one small problem: parking. Since I used the garage as my office, I had to park my car in the driveway. It seemed normal enough. Half the neighbors did the same thing. But apparently, that was my first mistake. 3 days after moving in, I found a bright yellow notice stuck to my windshield. It was from the Sunny Meadows Homeowners Association, signed by someone named Karen Mitchell, HOA President. The letter was typed in all capital letters, like she was yelling at me through paper. Violation notice, it read. Your vehicle has been parked in your driveway for more than 48 hours. This violates HOA Rule 15.3, no vehicles shall be parked in driveways for extended periods. First warning. Continued violations will result in fines and possible tow of vehicle. I stared at the notice, completely confused. Extended periods? It had been 3 days. I looked around the street and saw at least 5 other cars parked in driveways. Some looked like they'd been there for weeks, covered in pollen and bird droppings. That evening, I walked over to Karen Mitchell's house. It was easy to spot, the biggest house on the block with perfectly manicured bushes shaped like swans and a mailbox that probably cost more than my monthly car payment. I knocked on her door, holding the yellow notice. Karen opened the door and immediately frowned when she saw me. She was a woman in her 50s with short blonde hair that looked like it hadn't moved in years, thanks to an entire can of hairspray. She wore a pink tracksuit and had her arms crossed like she was already annoyed before I even spoke. You must be the new neighbor, she said, not bothering with pleasantries. I'm Karen Mitchell, HOA President. I assume you're here about the violation notice. Actually, yes, I said, trying to keep my voice friendly. I'm Jake Thompson. I just moved in, and I'm a bit confused about this parking rule. I see other people parking in their driveways. Karen's frown deepened. Those are temporary situations or approved exceptions. You can't just park in your driveway indefinitely. It looks unprofessional and brings down property values. But where else am I supposed to park? I converted my garage into an office. That's not the HOA's problem, Karen snapped. You should have checked the rules before making unauthorized modifications. You can park on the street like everyone else. I looked toward the street. There were maybe 3 open spots for the entire block, and they were always full by evening when people came home from work. The street parking fills up pretty quickly, I explained. And I work from home now, so I need to be able to get to my car easily for client meetings. Karen shrugged. Again, not our problem. Rules are rules. The next violation will be a $50 fine. I felt my patience starting to wear thin, but I kept my voice calm. Could I maybe apply for one of those exceptions you mentioned? Exceptions require a valid reason and approval from the board. Working from home isn't considered valid. Plenty of people manage without parking in their driveways. What about medical reasons? Accessibility needs. Karen's eyes narrowed. Do you have a disability, Mr. Thompson? No, I'm just trying to understand the options. The options are simple. Follow the rules or face the consequences. With that, she closed the door in my face. I stood there for a moment, staring at the closed door, feeling frustrated but not wanting to escalate things. I figured I'd just have to make the street parking work somehow. For the next week, I tried Karen's suggestion. Every morning, I'd walk 2 blocks to where I'd managed to find street parking the night before. Every evening, I'd drive around for 20 minutes looking for an open spot. Sometimes I'd have to park so far away that I'd get soaked walking home in the rain. The whole situation was exhausting, but I told myself it was temporary. Maybe some people would start parking in their garages, or maybe I'd get used to the routine. Then came the morning that changed everything. I had an important client presentation at 9 a.m., and I'd parked about 3 blocks away the night before. I left my house at 8:30, giving myself what I thought was plenty of time. But when I got to where I'd parked my car, it was gone. I stood there in my business suit, briefcase in hand, staring at the empty curb. There was no sign, no fire hydrant, nothing that would indicate why parking wasn't allowed. I called the police, thinking maybe it had been stolen. "Oh, that's probably an HOA tow," the dispatcher told me. "You'll need to call the towing company. The number should be posted in your neighborhood." I called the towing company from my phone while jogging back toward my house. They confirmed they had my car and that it had been towed at the request of the Sunny Meadows HOA. "But it was legally parked on a public street," I protested. "We just do what we're told, sir. You'll need to take that up with your HOA. Towing fee is $150, plus $25 per day for storage." I had to call my client and postpone our meeting, then take an expensive Uber ride across town to get my car back. By the time I paid the fees and made it home, it was almost noon, and I'd lost a potential client who decided to go with a more reliable marketing firm. That afternoon, I marched straight to Karen's house. This time, I wasn't trying to be friendly. Karen answered the door with the same sour expression as before. "Mr. Thompson, I see you learned your lesson about following parking rules." "My car was legally parked on a public street," I said, trying to keep my anger in check. "You can't just tow people's cars from public property." Karen smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant smile. "Actually, we can. The city granted our HOA special authority to manage parking on residential streets within our community boundaries. It's all perfectly legal." "That's insane. How is anyone supposed to know which streets are off limits?" "Easy. All of them within the Sunny Meadows community. Check your HOA handbook. It's all explained in Section 12. I realized I'd never actually read the HOA handbook. It was a thick binder that came with my closing documents, and I'd just stuck it on a shelf somewhere. "This is harassment," I said. "You're targeting me specifically." Karen's fake smile got wider. "I'm not targeting anyone. I'm enforcing the rules equally for everyone. Maybe if you'd followed the driveway parking rule like I told you, you wouldn't have had this problem. So my only option is to park in my driveway and pay fines." "Oh, the fines have gone up," Karen said cheerfully. "After your 3rd violation, it's $200 per incident. And after the 5th violation, we have the right to tow from your own driveway and place a lien on your property." I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. This woman was essentially holding my house hostage over a parking spot. "Why are you doing this?" I asked. "What did I do to you?" Karen's expression turned serious. "I've been HOA president for 8 years, Mr. Thompson. I've worked very hard to maintain the standards of this community. Property values in Sunny Meadows are 15% higher than surrounding neighborhoods because we enforce our rules. I'm not going to let some entitled millennial who thinks rules don't apply to him ruin what we've built here. I'm not trying to ruin anything. I just want to park my car somewhere reasonable. Then I suggest you find a new place to live. Somewhere more suitable to your lifestyle." She closed the door again, leaving me standing there feeling completely defeated. That night, I sat in my kitchen reading through the entire HOA handbook. Karen was right, it was all there in black and white. The HOA had somehow managed to get authority over street parking throughout the entire community. Driveway parking was limited to 48 hours per month, with exceptions only for medical emergencies or approved construction projects. The fines really did escalate the way she'd described. But as I read deeper into the rules, I started to notice something interesting. There were a lot of regulations that didn't seem to be enforced equally. Rules about lawn maintenance, exterior modifications, noise ordinances, all things that I'd observed violations of around the neighborhood that seemed to go unpunished. I decided to do a little investigating. The next morning, I took a walk around the entire Sunny Meadows community with my phone, taking pictures and notes. What I found was fascinating. The Hendersons 3 houses down had been running what was clearly a home business. People came and went all day, and there was always a van parked in their driveway with Henderson Home Repairs painted on the side. According to Section 8.2 of the HOA rules, home businesses weren't allowed. Mrs. Chen on Maple Street had painted her front door bright red. Section 4.1 clearly stated that all front doors must be neutral earth tones approved by the Architectural Review Committee. The Johnsons on Oak Avenue had installed a decorative fence that was at least 6 feet tall. Section 6.3 limited fences to 4 feet maximum. And most interesting of all, 3 houses on my very own street had cars that had been parked in their driveways for what was clearly more than 48 hours. One had a thick layer of dust and what looked like a bird's nest on the antenna. I spent the next week documenting everything, taking photos, and cross-referencing violations with the HOA handbook. By the end of my investigation, I had identified 27 clear violations of HOA rules by 15 different households. Armed with my evidence, I went back to Karen's house. This time, she didn't look pleased to see me. "What now, Mr. Thompson?" "I wanted to ask you about HOA rule enforcement," I said politely. "I've been reading the handbook, and I noticed some inconsistencies." "What kind of inconsistencies?" I pulled out my phone and showed her a photo of the Hendersons' business van. "This vehicle has been parked in the Hendersons' driveway for over a week, and they're clearly running a home business, which violates Section 8.2. Karen glanced at the photo and shrugged. "The Hendersons have been here for 12 years. Bob Henderson serves on the HOA board. Their situation is different." "Different how?" "It's complicated. You wouldn't understand." I showed her another photo. "What about Mrs. Chen's red door?" Section 4.1 says, "Mrs. Chen is elderly and on a fixed income. We make accommodations for long-term residents who contribute to the community." "And the Johnsons' fence?" Karen was clearly getting annoyed. "Mr. Thompson, you've been here for 3 weeks. The people you're talking about have been part of this community for years. They've earned the right to certain flexibility in rule interpretation. So the rules only apply to new residents. The rules apply to everyone, but enforcement takes community standing into account. That seems unfair." Karen's patience finally snapped. "You know what's unfair? Having some kid fresh out of college waltz into our neighborhood and immediately start causing problems. You haven't contributed anything to this community. You haven't volunteered for any committees, you haven't attended any HOA meetings, you don't know any of your neighbors' names. But you think you can march over here and demand special treatment. I'm not demanding special treatment. I just want the same treatment everyone else gets. Everyone else has earned their place here. You haven't." Karen's voice was getting louder, and I noticed a few neighbors starting to peer out their windows. "And frankly, your attitude tells me you probably never will." "What attitude?" "I've been nothing but polite." "Polite? You call photographing your neighbors and trying to get them in trouble polite? You call challenging the authority of elected community leaders polite?" I realized this conversation was going nowhere. Karen had made up her mind about me, and nothing I said was going to change it. "I guess we'll have to agree to disagree," I said. "I guess we will. But Mr. Thompson, let me be very clear about one thing. I've been dealing with troublemakers like you for years. They always think they're smarter than the system. They always think they can find some loophole or technicality that will get them out of following the rules. And they're always wrong." Karen leaned closer, lowering her voice so the neighbors couldn't hear. I will make your life in this community so difficult that you'll be begging me to help you sell your house. That's not a threat, it's a promise based on experience. The last person who tried to challenge me moved away within 6 months. Is that what happened to the previous owner of my house? Karen's smile returned. Smart boy. Maybe you'll learn faster than I thought. As I walked back to my house, I felt a mixture of anger and determination building inside me. Karen Mitchell thought she could bully me into submission, but she had seriously underestimated who she was dealing with. You see, Karen made one crucial mistake in her research about me. She knew I was young and new to the neighborhood, but she didn't know what I did for a living. She didn't know that my job at the marketing firm was specifically in crisis management and strategic communications. I spent my days helping companies navigate complex problems and turn disadvantages into advantages. And she definitely didn't know that my college degree was in business law, with a focus on property rights and municipal regulations. Karen Mitchell wanted a war? Fine. But she had just picked a fight with someone who actually knew how to win one. That evening, I sat down at my computer and started making phone calls. First, I called the city planning office to get copies of all the agreements between the municipality and the Sunny Meadows HOA. Then I called the county recorder's office to pull the original deed restrictions for the neighborhood. Finally, I called my old professor from law school, who specialized in HOA disputes. What I learned over the next few days was very interesting indeed. It turned out that the HOA's authority over street parking was based on a temporary agreement with the city that had been renewed annually for the past 8 years. But the agreement had very specific language about reasonable and equitable enforcement of parking regulations. More importantly, it required the HOA to provide adequate alternative parking solutions for all residents. The HOA had never provided any alternative parking solutions. They'd simply banned parking everywhere and left residents to figure it out themselves. Even more interesting was the original deed restriction language. When Sunny Meadows was developed in 1987, the original restrictions were much more limited in scope. Most of the harsh rules that Karen loved to enforce had been added later through amendments that required approval from 75% of homeowners. I requested voting records for all HOA rule changes over the past 10 years. What I found was shocking. Most of the restrictive amendments had been passed during annual meetings where only 15 to 20 homeowners showed up out of 127 total households. Karen had been systematically tightening the rules by holding votes when most people weren't paying attention. But the most shocking discovery was still to come. I found records showing that 3 members of the HOA board, including Karen herself, had repeatedly violated the same rules they were enforcing against others. Karen had parked in her own driveway for extended periods at least 6 times in the past year when she had construction work done on her house. Board member Bob Henderson had been running his home repair business for 2 years without any HOA approval. And Treasurer Linda Walsh had installed a hot tub without architectural approval, directly violating Section 5.4. I now had everything I needed to take Karen down, but I wanted to be strategic about it. Going nuclear right away might backfire and make me look like the villain. Instead, I decided to start with a more subtle approach. The next HOA meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday. According to the rules, any homeowner could request to be added to the agenda by submitting a written request at least 48 hours in advance. I submitted my request on Tuesday, discussion of parking policy enforcement and community equity. Thursday evening arrived, and I walked into the community center conference room where HOA meetings were held. There were about 20 people there, which was apparently a pretty good turnout. Karen sat at the front table with 4 other board members, looking supremely confident. Before we begin tonight's meeting, Karen announced, I want to address some recent concerns about parking enforcement. There seems to be some confusion about our policies, so let me be crystal clear. The rules apply to everyone equally, and they will be enforced consistently. She looked directly at me as she said this, clearly expecting me to back down. When my agenda item came up, I stood and walked to the front of the room. Karen introduced me with barely concealed irritation. Jake Thompson, our newest resident, has requested time to discuss parking policies. Thank you, Mrs. Mitchell, I said, smiling politely. I appreciate everyone taking the time to be here tonight. I know these meetings are important for our community. I pulled out my phone and connected it to the room's projector system. I've been doing some research into our HOA policies, and I wanted to share some interesting information with everyone. Karen looked nervous as my first slide appeared on the wall. It was a simple title, Parking Policy Analysis and Recommendations. As many of you know, I've been having some challenges with our current parking restrictions. But rather than just complain, I thought I'd do some research to better understand the situation and maybe suggest some improvements. My next slide showed a map of the neighborhood with all the restricted parking areas highlighted in red. It was almost the entire community. Our current parking restrictions affect 127 households and approximately 2.3 miles of residential streets. According to my count, this eliminates roughly 180 potential parking spaces from use by residents. I could see people in the audience starting to pay attention. A few were nodding. Apparently I wasn't the only one who'd had parking struggles. Now, the HOA handbook states that these restrictions are necessary to maintain property values and community appearance. But I wanted to understand how our policies compare to similar communities. My third slide showed a comparison chart of 5 other suburban neighborhoods in the area. None of them had restrictions anywhere near as severe as ours. Interestingly, when I looked at actual property values, Sunny Meadows ranks third out of these 6 communities. The 2 neighborhoods with higher property values actually have more permissive parking policies than we do. I could see Karen shifting uncomfortably in her chair. This wasn't the angry rant she'd been expecting. I also looked into the legal basis for our parking restrictions. I continued, clicking to the next slide. Our authority comes from an annual agreement with the city that requires reasonable and equitable enforcements and adequate alternative parking solutions. The next slide showed photos of various violations I documented around the neighborhood, but I'd been careful to blur out house numbers and other identifying information. In the interest of understanding how our policies are enforced, I did a community survey. What I found was interesting. Enforcement appears to be inconsistent, with some long-term residents receiving different treatment than newer residents. Karen finally stood up. Mr. Thompson, I think you've made your point. These kinds of accusations are inappropriate for a community meeting. I'm not making accusations, I replied calmly. I'm presenting data. And I have some suggestions for improving our policies to make them more fair and effective. My final slides outlined a comprehensive parking reform proposal. Designated visitor parking areas, a reasonable driveway parking allowance of 2 weeks per quarter, and clear, consistent enforcement guidelines that applied equally to all residents. When I finished, there was scattered applause, and several hands went up with questions. How much would it cost to implement these changes? Asked Mrs. Rodriguez from Pine Street. Actually, it would save us money, I replied. We currently pay the towing company $50 per tow as an administrative fee. My proposal would reduce the number of tows by about 80% while still maintaining community standards. More hands went up. People were asking thoughtful questions about implementation details, timeline, and community input. For the first time since I'd moved to Sunny Meadows, I felt like I was having a reasonable conversation about the parking issue. Karen tried to regain control of the meeting several times, but the audience was clearly engaged with the discussion. Finally, board member Bob Henderson spoke up. Jake, this is really thoughtful work. I think we should form a committee to study these recommendations in more detail. I think that's an excellent idea, agreed Linda Walsh, the treasurer. Karen's face was turning red. We don't need a committee. Our current policies work fine. Property values speak for themselves. Actually, said Mrs. Rodriguez, my nephew is looking to buy a house in this area, and he crossed us off his list because of the parking restrictions. He said it seemed too controlling. Several other people chimed in with similar stories. It was becoming clear that Karen's iron-fisted approach to HOA management wasn't as popular as she'd thought. I motioned to form a parking policy review committee, Bob Henderson said formally. I second, Linda Walsh added immediately. According to HOA rules, any motion seconded by a board member had to be put to a vote. Karen couldn't stop it without looking like a tyrant. The motion passed 18-2, with only Karen and her neighbor Mrs. Patterson voting against it. As people filed out of the meeting, several came up to shake my hand and thank me for the presentation. Mrs. Rodriguez invited me to a neighborhood barbecue the following weekend. Bob Henderson gave me his business card and asked if I'd be interested in joining the Architectural Review Committee. For the first time since moving to Sunny Meadows, I felt like I might actually belong here. But as I was packing up my materials, Karen approached me. She waited until everyone else had left before speaking. "That was very impressive, Mr. Thompson," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "You clearly put a lot of effort into that presentation." "Thank you. I hope we can work together to make some positive changes." Karen stepped closer, lowering her voice to barely above a whisper. "Let me tell you something, you smug little boy. You think you've won something here tonight, but you have no idea what you've just started. I've been running this community for 8 years. I know every trick, every loophole, every pressure point. You want to play games with me? Fine. But don't think for 1 second that I'm going to make this easy for you." She smiled that same unpleasant smile I'd seen before. "You see, Jake, there are lots of ways to make someone's life difficult that have nothing to do with parking. Noise complaints, landscaping violations, architectural infractions, pet policy enforcement, the list goes on and on. I hope you don't have any skeletons in your closet, because I'm going to be watching you very, very closely." "Are you threatening me?" "I'm educating you about community standards. Sleep well, Mr. Thompson. You're going to need your rest." As Karen walked away, I felt a chill run down my spine. I'd thought I was dealing with an overzealous HOA president, but I was beginning to realize that Karen Mitchell might be something much more dangerous. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Karen's threat and wondering what she might do next. I'd won a battle tonight, but something told me the war was just beginning. Around 3 a.m., I heard a loud banging sound from outside. I looked out my bedroom window and saw a garbage truck in front of my house. But it wasn't garbage day, that wasn't until Friday, and it was only Thursday night. I watched as the truck pulled away, leaving my trash can scattered across the street. Garbage was strewn everywhere, and several bags had been ripped open, spreading trash across my front yard. As I stood there in my pajamas, staring at the mess, I noticed a familiar figure standing in an upstairs window across the street. Karen Mitchell was watching me, and even from a distance, I could see that she was smiling. I spent the next hour cleaning up garbage in the dark, knowing that Karen was probably still watching. When I finally got back inside, I found a new yellow violation notice that had been slipped under my front door while I was outside. Violation notice: trash receptacles placed at curb on non-collection day. This violates HOA Rule 9.2, $50 fine will be assessed. Continued violations may result in additional penalties. The notice was dated 3:15 a.m. and signed by Karen Mitchell. I realized then that Karen hadn't just threatened me, she'd declared war. And apparently, she was planning to fight dirty. But what Karen didn't know was that her little garbage truck stunt had just given me the perfect opportunity to set my real plan in motion. You see, while she was focused on petty harassment, I'd been working on something much bigger. Something that would turn her own rules against her in ways she never saw coming. The next morning, I called in sick to work and spent the day making preparations. By evening, everything was ready. Karen Mitchell thought she was clever, but she was about to learn that she'd picked a fight with the wrong person. And the beautiful part? She was going to defeat herself without even realizing it until it was too late. As I sat in my kitchen that night, looking at the violation notice and planning my next move, I couldn't help but smile. Karen wanted to play games? Perfect. Because I was about to show her what a real game looked like. The trap was set. All I had to do now was wait for Karen to walk right into it. And knowing Karen, that wouldn't take long at all. The trap I had set for Karen was beautifully simple, and it all started with something she probably thought was completely unrelated to our parking war, her precious garden. You see, while I was doing my research on HOA violations around the neighborhood, I'd noticed something interesting about Karen's house. Her perfectly manicured front yard wasn't just beautiful, it was also completely against HOA rules. According to Section 7.4 of our community handbook, all landscaping had to use drought-resistant native plants appropriate for Ohio's climate zone. Karen's yard was filled with exotic flowers that required constant watering, automatic sprinkler systems, and what looked like enough fertilizer to grow crops on a small farm. More importantly, Section 7.6 prohibited any landscaping that created excessive water runoff or environmental impact. Karen's elaborate irrigation system was sending streams of water down the sidewalk every morning, and I'd noticed that her grass was so over-fertilized that it was actually killing the grass in her neighbors' yards where the runoff flowed. But here's the really clever part, I wasn't going to report Karen's violations myself. That would be too obvious, and she'd know it came from me. Instead, I was going to let her own paranoia and need for control do the work for me. The morning after the garbage truck incident, I put my plan into motion. I started by doing exactly what Karen expected me to do. I filed a formal complaint about the mysterious garbage truck and the violation notice she'd issued at 3 a.m. I hand-delivered a letter to each HOA board member, requesting a formal investigation into harassment and abuse of authority by an HOA officer. I included photos of the scattered garbage, the timeline of events, and copies of all my previous interactions with Karen. I made sure to be completely factual and professional, letting the evidence speak for itself. But that was just the opening move. The real strategy was much more subtle. Over the next week, I started taking daily walks around the neighborhood. Not obvious surveillance walks, just casual strolls where I'd stop to chat with neighbors, compliment people's gardens, and generally be the friendly new neighbor that Karen had accused me of not being. During these conversations, I'd casually mention how much I was learning about gardening and HOA landscaping rules. It's so complicated, I'd say. Did you know there are restrictions on what types of plants we can use? I'm trying to make sure I don't accidentally violate any rules. I'd pull out my phone and show them Section 7.4 of the handbook. See, it says we're supposed to use native plants. I had no idea. I was about to plant some roses, but I guess those aren't native to Ohio. Most people had never actually read the landscaping rules. Why would they? But once I pointed them out, they started looking around their own yards with new eyes. And more importantly, they started looking at other people's yards too. Mrs. Rodriguez was the first to notice. You know, Jake, I don't think Karen's roses are native plants either. And what about those orchids she has by her front door? Those definitely aren't from Ohio. Oh, I'm sure she got approval from the Architectural Review Committee, I replied innocently. She's been here so long, she probably knows all the proper procedures. But I could see the seed of doubt I'd planted starting to grow. 3 days later, Mrs. Rodriguez mentioned during our chat that she'd asked Karen about the landscaping approval process. She got really defensive, Mrs. Rodriguez told me. Said I didn't need to worry about her garden and that I should focus on my own property. It was kind of rude, actually. Perfect. Karen's arrogance was starting to alienate the very neighbors who had supported her for years. Meanwhile, I was making progress on other fronts. Bob Henderson, the board member who'd supported forming the parking committee, had started asking questions about Karen's late-night violation notices. Apparently, I wasn't the first person to receive mysteriously timed violations that seemed designed more for harassment than actual rule enforcement. She issued a noise violation to the Patels last month at 2 a.m., Bob told me during a phone call. Claimed their air conditioning unit was too loud. But the Patels have lived here for 5 years, and no one has ever complained about their AC before. That does seem unusual, I agreed. I thought violations had to be issued during reasonable hours unless there was an emergency. They do. I'm starting to think Karen might be overstepping her authority. Bob wasn't the only board member having doubts. Linda Walsh, the treasurer, had started asking questions about the HOA's finances. Apparently, the towing fees and violation fines were adding up to a significant amount of money, but none of it was being used for community improvements like Karen had promised. "We've collected over $15,000 in fines and fees this year," Linda told me during a chance encounter at the grocery store. "But our community improvement budget is exactly the same as last year." I asked Karen where the money was going, and she said it was being held in reserve for future projects, but she won't say what projects. "That's interesting," I said. "I thought HOA finances were supposed to be transparent to all homeowners." "They are. That's why I'm requesting a full financial audit at next month's board meeting." Things were falling into place even better than I'd hoped. Karen's dictatorial management style was finally catching up with her, and she didn't even realize it yet. But the real breakthrough came from an unexpected source. I was walking past the Henderson house one afternoon when Bob flagged me down. "Jake, I'm glad I caught you. I wanted to thank you for bringing up those parking policy issues." It got me thinking about other HOA policies that might need review. "Oh? Like what?" Bob looked around to make sure no one was listening, then leaned closer. "Well, Karen's been after me for months about my business van. Says it violates the home business restrictions. But when I looked up the actual rules, I realized that my repair business is specifically exempted under Section 8.3, professional services that benefit the community. I've been fixing neighbors' fences and decks for years at cost. That's exactly what the exemption was designed for. So why has she been giving you trouble about it? I think she just likes having something to hold over people's heads. Control, you know? But here's the thing, I started looking at her own compliance with HOA rules, and Bob paused, seeming unsure whether to continue. "And what?" "Well, let's just say that glass houses and stones come to mind." Bob wouldn't elaborate, but he did suggest that I might want to attend the next Architectural Review Committee meeting. "We're reviewing some requests for landscaping modifications," he said with a meaningful look. "Might be educational." That evening, I decided it was time to accelerate my timeline. I'd been patient and strategic, but Karen was still actively harassing me with petty violations. Just that morning, I'd found another yellow notice claiming that my mailbox was improperly positioned, even though it hadn't been moved since the day I bought the house. I called my old law professor, Dr. Patricia Williams, who specialized in HOA disputes. "Jake, how's life in suburbia treating you?" "It's been educational, Professor Williams. I'm dealing with an HOA president who seems to think the rules don't apply to her, and I could use some advice." I explained the situation, including Karen's escalating harassment and the evidence I'd gathered about selective rule enforcement. Dr. Williams listened carefully, asking pointed questions about documentation and timeline. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "Jake, what you're describing sounds like a textbook case of HOA abuse of power. But more than that, it sounds like potential criminal harassment and possibly even fraud, depending on how those violation fees are being handled." Criminal harassment. Issuing false violations, coordinating with service companies to create problems for residents, using HOA authority for personal vendettas, yes, that could absolutely rise to the level of criminal harassment. And if she's collecting fines for violations that aren't actually violations, that's theft by deception. Professor Williams gave me the contact information for a lawyer who specialized in HOA disputes and suggested I start documenting everything even more carefully. "But Jake," she added, "be very careful. People like this HOA president don't give up easily. If she realizes you're building a case against her, she might escalate beyond petty harassment." That warning turned out to be prophetic. The next morning, I woke up to find my car surrounded by orange traffic cones and a sign that read "No parking, emergency water main repair." A city truck was parked nearby, and workers were standing around drinking coffee. I walked over to ask about the water main work. "Water main?" The supervisor looked confused. "We're not doing any water main work here." We got a call about a gas leak, but we can't find any evidence of one. Probably a false alarm. So I can move my car. Sure. There's no actual problem here. As I moved the cones and got into my car, I noticed Karen watching from her window again. When she saw me looking, she quickly closed the curtains. An hour later, I found another violation notice on my windshield: failure to comply with emergency parking restrictions, $75 fine. That's when I realized Karen had crossed a line. She wasn't just harassing me anymore, she was potentially interfering with emergency services and definitely wasting city resources with false reports. I called the city's non-emergency line and reported the fake gas leak call. The dispatcher took down all the details and said they'd investigate. Then I called the lawyer Dr. Williams had recommended. Attorney Michael Chen listened to my story with growing interest. Mr. Thompson, you've done excellent work documenting this situation. What you're describing goes well beyond typical HOA disputes. This sounds like organized harassment and possibly wire fraud if she's been collecting money for invalid violations. What are my options? Several. We could file a civil suit for harassment and seek an injunction preventing further retaliation. We could also report this to the State Attorney General's office. They take HOA fraud very seriously. Or we could try to resolve this through the HOA's internal governance processes first. What would you recommend? Attorney Chen was quiet for a moment. Honestly? I'd like to see how deep this rabbit hole goes before we decide on a strategy. If this woman is as corrupt as she seems, there might be other victims. Would you be willing to do a little more investigation before we proceed? I agreed, and Attorney Chen explained what he needed: financial records showing where violation fees were going, evidence of selective rule enforcement, and documentation of any other residents who might have been harassed. But Mr. Thompson, he warned, be very careful. People who abuse power like this can become desperate when they feel cornered. Don't do anything that could put you in danger. I assured him I'd be careful, but privately, I was getting excited. Karen had no idea that her petty harassment campaign was about to expose what sounded like a much larger pattern of abuse and corruption. Over the next week, I started reaching out to other neighbors who had received violations from Karen. What I found was disturbing. The Patels had received $400 in fines over the past year for various noise violations, all issued late at night or early in the morning, all for things like air conditioning, lawn mowers used during approved hours, and children playing in their own backyard. Mrs. Chen, the elderly woman with the red door, had been fined $200 for unapproved exterior modifications even though her door had been red when she bought the house 3 years ago. The Martinez family had been charged $150 for excessive holiday decorations. Their crime was putting up Christmas lights in December. In total, I found evidence of over $3,000 in questionable fines issued to 7 different families, all new residents or people who had somehow gotten on Karen's bad side. But the most shocking discovery came when I was talking to Jennifer Walsh, Linda's daughter, who worked part-time as the HOA's administrative assistant. My mom asked me to help her review the financial records. Jennifer told me quietly when I ran into her at the coffee shop. Jake, there's something really wrong with the books. The violation fees that are supposedly going into a community improvement fund? They're actually going into a separate account that only Karen has access to. How much money are we talking about? Over the past 3 years? Nearly $25,000. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. Karen wasn't just a power-hungry HOA president, she was apparently stealing from the community. Has your mom reported this? She's trying to, but Karen keeps blocking her access to records. Mom's calling for an emergency board meeting, but Karen says she needs proper procedures to be followed first. Jennifer looked around nervously. Jake, my mom told me to warn you. Karen's been asking questions about you around the neighborhood. Not just about rule violations, personal stuff. Where you work, who you hang out with, whether you have a girlfriend. It's creepy. That evening, as I was working in my home office, I heard someone trying my front door handle. Then my back door. Then I saw flashlight beams moving around my yard. I called 911. The police arrived within minutes and found evidence that someone had tried to jimmy my back door lock. They also found footprints under my office window, where someone had apparently been trying to look inside. Any idea who might want to break into your house? Officer Rodriguez asked as she took my statement. I've been having a dispute with my HOA president. She's been escalating her harassment lately. Officer Rodriguez raised an eyebrow. Karen Mitchell? We've had a few complaints about her lately. Mostly harassment stuff. You think she'd actually try to break into your house? I don't know what she's capable of at this point. The officer made detailed notes and promised to increase patrols in the area. Mr. Thompson, I'd recommend installing some security cameras if you can. People like this sometimes escalate when they feel like they're losing control. That night, I barely slept. I kept hearing every small sound, wondering if someone was trying to break in again. The next morning, I called Attorney Chen and updated him on everything I'd learned. Mr. Thompson, this is much more serious than I initially thought. We're talking about potential embezzlement, criminal harassment, stalking, and attempted breaking and entering. I think it's time to go to the authorities. What about the other homeowners? Shouldn't we try to help them too? We will. But right now, I'm concerned about your safety. This woman sounds increasingly unstable. Attorney Chen scheduled a meeting with both the State Attorney General's HOA Fraud Unit and the local police department for the following week. But Karen wasn't done with me yet. That afternoon, I came home to find a notice taped to my front door. But this wasn't a violation notice, it was an official HOA hearing summons. Notice of disciplinary hearing, it read. Jake Thompson is hereby summoned to appear before the HOA Disciplinary Committee on charges of 1. Harassment of HOA officials, 2. Attempting to incite rebellion against lawful HOA authority, 3. Violation of community standards and behavioral covenants, 4. Repeated parking infractions despite warnings. The hearing was scheduled for the following Thursday, the day before my meeting with Attorney Chen and the authorities. Failure to appear will result in automatic assessment of maximum penalties, including liens against property and potential forced sale proceedings. I stared at the notice in disbelief. Karen was apparently trying to force me out of my house before I could expose her corruption. But as I read through the charges more carefully, I started to smile. Karen had just made a huge mistake. You see, according to the HOA bylaws, disciplinary hearings had to follow strict procedures. All charges had to be specific and documented. All evidence had to be provided to the accused at least 72 hours before the hearing. And most importantly, the hearing panel had to consist of 3 board members who hadn't been involved in the initial complaint. Karen had violated every single one of these requirements. More than that, she'd scheduled the hearing for a Thursday evening, but according to the bylaws, all official HOA business had to be conducted during regular board meetings on the second Tuesday of each month, unless a special meeting was called with proper notice to all homeowners. Karen was so eager to get rid of me that she'd rushed the process and given me grounds to invalidate the entire proceeding. I called Attorney Chen immediately. She's getting desperate, he agreed after I read him the hearing notice. This is actually good news for us. She's making procedural errors that will help our case. But Jake, I'm worried about what she might do when this hearing doesn't go the way she expects. What do you mean? I mean that people who are willing to steal money and break into houses don't usually stop when legal pressure increases. They escalate. Attorney Chen advised me to attend the hearing but to bring a witness and record everything. Don't let her bully you into agreeing to anything. Just state your position calmly and let her hang herself with procedure violations. The next few days passed slowly. I installed security cameras around my house and made sure all my doors and windows had good locks. I also reached out to supportive neighbors like Bob Henderson and Mrs. Rodriguez, letting them know about the hearing and asking if they'd be willing to attend as witnesses. Absolutely, Bob said immediately. Karen's gone too far this time. A lot of us have been talking, and we're sick of her behavior. Count me in too, Mrs. Rodriguez added when I called her. My nephew decided not to buy in this neighborhood because of the parking restrictions, but now I'm hearing about all this other stuff Karen's been doing. It needs to stop. Thursday evening arrived, and I walked into the community center conference room feeling nervous but prepared. I'd brought copies of all relevant bylaws, my documentation of Karen's violations, and a small digital recorder. Karen was already there with 2 other board members I didn't recognize, not Bob Henderson or Linda Walsh, which was itself a violation of procedure since they should have been notified of any disciplinary hearing involving a community member. Mr. Thompson, Karen said formally as I took a seat. Thank you for appearing tonight. We have some serious matters to discuss. Before we begin, I said politely, I'd like to review the procedural requirements for this hearing to make sure everything is conducted properly. Karen's eyes narrowed. The procedures will be followed appropriately. You're here to answer charges, not to question HOA authority. Actually, according to Section 12. Of the bylaws, any homeowner has the right to ensure proper procedures are followed in disciplinary proceedings. I pulled out my copy of the bylaws and started reading the relevant sections aloud. With each requirement I listed, Karen's face got redder. Furthermore, I continued, Section 12.7 requires that all disciplinary hearings be conducted during regular board meetings or properly noticed special meetings. This appears to be neither. Mr. Thompson, Karen interrupted, you're being disruptive. Either participate in this hearing properly or face additional charges. I'm happy to participate, Mrs. Mitchell. I'm just making sure my rights are protected. That's when the door opened and Bob Henderson walked in, followed by Linda Walsh, Mrs. Rodriguez, and Jennifer Walsh. Karen looked shocked. This is a closed hearing. These people need to leave. Actually, Bob Henderson said, pulling out his own copy of the bylaws, Section 12. 5 states that any homeowner may request witnesses to disciplinary proceedings, and board members have the right to attend any official HOA business. This isn't a board meeting, Karen snapped. Then it's not a valid disciplinary hearing, Linda Walsh replied. Karen, what exactly do you think you're doing here? I watched as Karen realized her mistake. She'd been so focused on railroading me out of the community that she'd forgotten the other board members might not go along with her illegal procedures. Fine, Karen said through gritted teeth. Let's make this a special board meeting. I call this meeting to order. You can't just declare a special board meeting, Bob Henderson objected. Those require 48 hours notice to all homeowners. And a quorum of board members, Linda Walsh added. Where are the other 2 board members? Karen was trapped. She couldn't proceed with her fake hearing, but she also couldn't back down without losing face. Mr. Thompson, she said finally, perhaps we can resolve this matter informally. If you're willing to work with us on finding a solution that addresses our concerns about your integration into the community. What kind of solution? Karen glanced at the other people in the room, clearly uncomfortable with the audience. Perhaps a voluntary relocation assistance program. The HOA has connections with realtors who specialize in helping homeowners find properties more suitable to their needs. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She was actually trying to bribe me to move away. Are you asking me to leave the neighborhood? I'm suggesting that you might be happier somewhere with less structure. Bob Henderson stood up. Karen, this is completely inappropriate. You can't pressure a homeowner to sell their house because you don't like them. I'm not pressuring anyone, Karen replied. I'm offering assistance. It sounds like coercion to me, Mrs. Rodriguez said. Linda Walsh was taking notes on everything that was being said. Karen, I think we need to adjourn this, whatever this is, and schedule a proper board meeting to discuss your conduct. Karen's composure finally cracked. My conduct? I've been protecting this community for 8 years. I've maintained our property values, enforced our standards, and kept out the kind of people who would destroy what we've built here. What kind of people? I asked quietly. Karen looked directly at me, her mask of professionalism completely gone. People who think rules don't apply to them. People who come into established communities and immediately start causing trouble. People who don't understand that some of us have invested our entire lives in making this neighborhood what it is. Karen, Bob Henderson said gently, Jake hasn't caused any trouble. He identified some problems with our parking policies and offered constructive solutions. He's been taking pictures of neighbors' houses. Karen shouted. He's been questioning HOA authority and trying to turn people against the board. He's been documenting rule violations, Linda Walsh corrected. The same thing you do when you issue violation notices. Karen realized she was losing control of the narrative. She took a deep breath and seemed to regain some composure. I think this meeting has run its course, she said coldly. Mr. Thompson, consider this your final warning. Any further disruption of community harmony will result in serious consequences. What kind of consequences? I asked. Karen smiled that unpleasant smile I'd come to know so well. The kind that will make you wish you'd taken my relocation offer. With that, she gathered her papers and stalked out of the room, leaving the rest of us sitting there in stunned silence. Jake, Bob Henderson said after a moment, I think you need to be very careful. Karen's not thinking rationally anymore. We all need to be careful, Linda Walsh added. I'm calling an emergency board meeting to discuss Karen's removal as president. This has gone way too far. As everyone filed out, Mrs. Rodriguez approached me. Jake, my husband is a retired police detective. He says Karen's behavior fits the pattern of someone who's about to do something desperate. Maybe you should stay somewhere else for a few days. I thanked her for the concern but decided I wasn't going to be driven from my own home. I had security cameras now, and the police were aware of the situation. Besides, I had a meeting with Attorney Chen and the authorities in the morning. Karen's reign of terror was about to end. Also, I thought. I woke up the next morning to the sound of sirens. When I looked out my window, I saw fire trucks surrounding my house, and firefighters were connecting hoses to the hydrant across the street. I ran outside in my pajamas to find the fire chief talking to one of his men. Excuse me, I called out, is there a fire? The fire chief looked confused. We got a report of a house fire at this address, but I don't see any sign of smoke or flames. There's no fire here, I said. Someone must have made a mistake. The fire chief frowned. This is the second false alarm we've had at this address this week. Someone called in a gas leak on Tuesday that turned out to be nothing. My blood ran cold. Karen was escalating again, and now she was potentially putting lives at risk with false emergency calls. Sir, I think someone might be making these calls intentionally. I'm involved in a dispute with my HOA president, and she's been harassing me. The fire chief's expression hardened. False emergency calls are a felony, sir. If someone's doing this intentionally, they need to be arrested. He gave me the report number and advised me to contact the police immediately. As the fire trucks pulled away, I noticed Karen standing in her doorway, watching. When she saw me looking at her, she went back inside and closed the door. I was supposed to meet Attorney Chen at 10 a.m., but now I had to deal with another false emergency call. I called his office and explained what had happened. Mr. Thompson, you need to get out of that house right now, Attorney Chen said urgently. This woman is escalating to dangerous behavior. False emergency calls, attempted break-ins, she's becoming increasingly desperate, and desperate people do unpredictable things. But I can't let her drive me out of my own home. You won't be driven out permanently. But right now, you need to be somewhere safe while we get the authorities involved. Do you have somewhere you can stay? I thought about it. My parents lived 2 hours away, but I had a friend from college who lived across town. Yes, I can stay with a friend for a few days. Good. Pack a bag and get out of there. I'm calling the police and the state attorney general's office right now. We're going to put a stop to this today. As I packed a quick bag, I felt angry and frustrated. Karen had succeeded in driving me from my home, at least temporarily. But I also felt something else, anticipation. because Karen had finally crossed the line into criminal behavior, and that meant the authorities would have to take action. Her days of terrorizing the neighborhood were numbered. What I didn't know was that Karen had one more card to play, and it was the most dangerous one yet. As I loaded my bag into my car, I found one final note tucked under my windshield wiper. "Running away won't save you, Jake. I know where you work. I know where your friends live. I know where your parents live in Columbus. You can't hide from me forever." The note wasn't signed, but I recognized Karen's handwriting from all the violation notices. I stared at the note, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. Karen wasn't just harassing me anymore, she was stalking me. And now she was threatening to go after my family and friends. This had gone from an HOA dispute to something much darker and more dangerous. I got in my car and drove away, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Karen was watching me leave, planning her next move. What I didn't know was that while I was focused on getting away from Karen, she was already putting the final phase of her plan into motion. A plan that would either destroy me completely or backfire so spectacularly that it would end her reign of terror forever. The war between us was about to reach its climax, and only one of us would survive it. What Karen didn't realize as she watched me drive away that morning was that her threatening note had just sealed her own fate. You see, while she thought she was intimidating me into submission, she had actually given me the final piece of evidence I needed to destroy her completely. By the time I reached my friend Dave's apartment across town, Attorney Chen had already contacted Detective Maria Santos from the police department's harassment unit and Assistant Attorney General Rebecca Torres from the HOA Fraud Division. Within 2 hours, I was sitting in a conference room at police headquarters, laying out 3 months of evidence against Karen Mitchell. "Mr. Thompson," Detective Santos said as she reviewed the threatening note, "this woman has committed at least 6 felonies that I can identify just from what you've shown me today. Stalking, harassment, filing false police reports, embezzlement, attempted burglary, and now criminal threatening. We have enough to arrest her right now." But, Assistant Attorney General Torres added, "We'd like to build an even stronger case. What you've uncovered suggests this might be part of a larger pattern of HOA fraud. Would you be willing to help us gather more evidence?" I agreed immediately. They explained that they wanted to conduct a thorough investigation of Karen's financial activities and document any other victims in the community. "We'll have an undercover officer monitoring your house," Detective Santos promised. "If Karen tries anything else, we'll catch her in the act." That afternoon, while I was supposed to be hiding at Dave's apartment, I was actually sitting in an unmarked police van watching my own house through surveillance equipment. Detective Santos and 2 other officers were with me, waiting to see what Karen would do next. We didn't have to wait long. At 3:30 p.m., a white van pulled up in front of my house. A man got out and started putting up orange traffic cones around my driveway. Then he placed a large sign that read, "Condemned property, no entry by order of City Health Department." "That's not a real city vehicle," Detective Santos observed, looking through binoculars. "The license plate doesn't match city fleet records." We watched as the man finished setting up his fake condemnation scene and drove away. 15 minutes later, Karen appeared with her phone, taking pictures of the condemned property from multiple angles. "She's documenting her own crime," Detective Santos said with amazement. "She's going to use those photos to claim your house is uninhabitable and try to force a sale through HOA action." But Karen wasn't done. At 4 p.m., a second van arrived, this one from a legitimate towing company. The driver got out and started hooking up my car, which I'd left parked in my driveway. "Should we stop this?" I asked. "Not yet," Detective Santos replied. "Let's see how far she's willing to go." The tow truck driver seemed confused about something. He kept looking at paperwork and then at the house. Finally, he knocked on my front door. When no one answered, he called someone on his phone. Through the surveillance equipment, we could hear his side of the conversation. "Yeah, I'm at the address you gave me, but something doesn't seem right. The car's legally parked in the owner's driveway, and there's no violation notice visible. You're sure this is authorized?" Okay, but I'm going to need written confirmation before I tow this vehicle. The driver waited for several minutes, then shook his head and started unhooking my car. Smart guy, Detective Santos commented. He smells something fishy. Karen appeared from wherever she'd been hiding and marched over to confront the tow truck driver. Even from our position down the street, we could see she was angry. Time to move in, Detective Santos decided. She's about to commit fraud right in front of us. We drove up just as Karen was waving what looked like official paperwork at the confused tow truck driver. Detective Santos said, getting out of the van and showing her badge, "I'm going to need to see that paperwork." Karen's face went white. "Officer, this is just a routine HOA matter. This resident has been parking illegally. The vehicle is parked in the owner's driveway," Detective Santos pointed out. "How is that illegal?" It's complicated. HOA rules." Detective Santos examined the paperwork Karen had been showing the tow truck driver. This appears to be a falsified city towing authorization. Did you create this document?" No. I received it from. From who?" Karen looked around desperately, as if searching for an escape route. That's when she noticed me getting out of the surveillance van. "You," she shouted, pointing at me. "You're supposed to be gone. I told you to leave." "Actually," Detective Santos said calmly, "Mr. Thompson is assisting us with an investigation into HOA fraud. You're under arrest for filing false police reports, harassment, stalking, and attempted fraud." As Detective Santos began reading Karen her rights, Karen's composure completely collapsed. "This isn't fair," she screamed. "I've devoted 8 years of my life to this community. I've protected property values. I've maintained standards. And this is how I'm repaid? By some entitled little boy who thinks he can just waltz in and destroy everything I've built." Detective Santos said firmly, "You need to calm down." "Calm down? My entire life is falling apart because of him." Karen pointed at me again, her voice becoming increasingly shrill. "He's been stalking me. He's been harassing me. He's been trying to destroy the HOA. We have evidence of you stalking Mr. Thompson, not the other way around." "Evidence? What evidence?" Detective Santos pulled out her phone and showed Karen photos of her standing in her window at 3 a.m. the night of the garbage truck incident, time-stamped security footage of her placing violation notices on my car, and records of the false emergency calls traced back to her phone number. Karen stared at the evidence in shock. "How did you or where did you get?" "Mr. Thompson has been very thorough in documenting your harassment," Detective Santos explained. "We also have financial records showing misappropriation of HOA funds, witness statements from neighbors about your threats and intimidation, and now attempted fraud with falsified city documents." That's when Karen made her final, desperate play. "Fine," she shouted. "You want to know the truth?" "Yes, I've been tough on him. Yes, I've used every tool at my disposal to maintain community standards. But you know what? It worked. This neighborhood has the highest property values in the county because I was willing to do the hard job of keeping out undesirable elements." "Undesirable elements?" I asked. Karen turned to face me, and for the first time, I saw real hatred in her eyes. "People like you," she said venomously. "Young, entitled, disrespectful people who think they can come into established communities and change everything to suit their convenience. People who don't understand sacrifice, who don't appreciate what others have built, who think rules are just suggestions." "I followed all the rules," I pointed out. "You're the one who broke them." "I protected this community," Karen shrieked. "Every violation I issued, every fine I collected, every tough decision I made was for the good of Sunny Meadows. And if I had to bend a few procedural rules to keep people like you from destroying our property values, then so be it." Detective Santos looked at Assistant Attorney General Torres, who had just arrived on the scene. "Did she just confess to fraud?" "She did indeed," Torres replied, pulling out a digital recorder. Mrs. Mitchell, you just admitted to issuing false violations and collecting fraudulent fines. That's theft by deception, a third-degree felony. Karen suddenly realized what she'd said. I didn't mean. I was just trying to protect. Detective Santos said, you're already under arrest. Anything else you say can and will be used against you in court. As they led Karen away in handcuffs, she turned back to shout one final threat at me. This isn't over, Jake Thompson. Even if I go to prison, there are other people in this community who understand what you really are. They won't let you destroy what we've built. But as Karen was making her final threat, something beautiful was happening behind her. Bob Henderson was standing in his front yard, shaking his head in disgust. Mrs. Rodriguez was recording Karen's meltdown on her phone. Linda Walsh was taking notes for what I assumed would be an emergency board meeting to elect a new HOA president. And most telling of all, several neighbors who had previously supported Karen, including her friend Mrs. Patterson, were standing with their arms crossed, looking embarrassed and ashamed of her behavior. Karen had finally revealed her true nature to the entire community, and no one was impressed. After Karen was taken away, Detective Santos and Attorney General Torres briefed me on what would happen next. We'll need you to testify at her trial, Torres explained. Based on the evidence, she's looking at multiple felony charges. The financial fraud alone could result in 5 years in prison. What about the other residents she victimized? We'll be reaching out to all of them. This case could result in refunds of illegally collected fines and a complete overhaul of HOA governance in your community. Detective Santos added, we'll also be recommending that the city review its agreement with Sunny Meadows HOA regarding parking enforcement. What happened here suggests the system is too easily abused. That evening, I finally returned to my house. The fake condemnation signs were gone, removed by city workers who confirmed they were completely fraudulent. My car was safely in my driveway. And for the first time since moving to Sunny Meadows, I felt like I could actually relax. But the best part was yet to come. Around 7 p.m., my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Bob Henderson, Linda Walsh, Mrs. Rodriguez, and about a dozen other neighbors standing on my front porch. Jake, Bob said, we owe you an apology. And we owe you our thanks. For what? For having the courage to stand up to Karen when the rest of us were too intimidated or too comfortable to act, Mrs. Rodriguez explained. We all knew something wasn't right, but we were afraid to speak up. Linda Walsh stepped forward. Jake, the board voted unanimously tonight to elect you as our new HOA president. If you're willing to serve. I was shocked. I don't know anything about running an HOA. You know about fairness, Bob Henderson said. You know about following rules consistently. And you've already shown you can bring the community together instead of tearing it apart. Besides, Mrs. Rodriguez added with a smile, we figure anyone who can outsmart Karen Mitchell is smart enough to handle a homeowners association. Over the next few weeks, the transformation in Sunny Meadows was remarkable. The Parking Policy Review Committee implemented my original recommendations, creating reasonable rules that actually served the community instead of terrorizing residents. We established designated visitor parking areas and allowed homeowners to park in their driveways for up to 2 weeks per quarter. Linda Walsh conducted a thorough financial audit that revealed Karen had stolen nearly $28,000 over 3 years. The State Attorney General's office helped us recover most of the money, which we used to make actual community improvements, new playground equipment, better street lighting, and repairs to the community center. We also implemented transparent governance procedures, including regular financial reports to all homeowners and recorded board meetings that anyone could attend. But the most satisfying change was cultural. Instead of living in fear of violation notices and arbitrary enforcement, neighbors started talking to each other again. We organized community barbecues, started a neighborhood watch program, and created a welcome committee for new residents. The Hendersons expanded their repair business and now officially maintain community common areas. Mrs. Chen's Red Door became a neighborhood landmark that we're all proud of. The Martinez family's Christmas light display is now an annual community tradition. And me? I discovered that I actually enjoyed community leadership when it was done right. Instead of using rules to control and intimidate people, we used them to create a fair framework that protected everyone's rights while maintaining reasonable standards. Karen Mitchell was sentenced to 3 years in prison for fraud, harassment, and filing false police reports. The judge noted that her abuse of authority had undermined the legitimate functions of homeowner associations and violated the trust placed in community leaders. During her sentencing hearing, Karen made one final statement to the court. "Your Honor, I never intended to hurt anyone. I truly believed I was protecting my community from people who would destroy what we had built. I see now that my methods were wrong, but my intentions were always to preserve the values and standards that made Sunny Meadows a desirable place to live." The judge was not impressed. "Mrs. Mitchell, good intentions do not excuse criminal behavior. You systematically abused your authority, stole money from your neighbors, and terrorized residents who challenged your decisions. The standards you claim to have been protecting were actually a mask for personal power and control." But here's the thing that Karen never understood, even at the end. Real community standards aren't about perfect lawns and color-coordinated mailboxes. They're about treating your neighbors with respect, following rules fairly and consistently, and working together to solve problems instead of creating them. The day Karen went to prison, I found myself thinking about her threat that other people in the community would continue her work of keeping out undesirable elements. She was wrong about that, like she was wrong about so many things. But she was right about one thing: I had changed Sunny Meadows forever. I had changed it from a place where people lived in fear of their neighbors into a place where people actually enjoyed being neighbors. 6 months later, I was working in my garage office when I heard a familiar sound, the ding of a text message. But this wasn't a violation notice or a threatening message. It was from Mrs. Rodriguez. "Jake, new family moving in next week. Want to help organize a welcome party?" I smiled and typed back, "Absolutely. I'll bring the parking policy handbook, the new, reasonable version." As I hit send, I looked out my office window at my car, parked peacefully in my own driveway where it belonged. Karen Mitchell had tried to teach me that I didn't belong in Sunny Meadows. Instead, she taught me that home isn't just a place you buy, it's a place you help create. And sometimes, the best way to create a home is to stand up to the people who are trying to destroy it. The war was over. The community had won. And for the first time since moving to Sunny Meadows, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. But the most beautiful part? Karen's old house, with its perfectly manicured lawn and swan-shaped bushes, now belongs to a lovely young family with 2 small children who ride their bicycles in the driveway every evening. And nobody, absolutely nobody, has ever issued them a violation notice for it. That's what real community standards look like.